Hi everyone, my name is Courtney Geary and I am the Connections Liaison at Carson Middle School. And I wanted to take a minute to just kind of share with you a story I read this summer that has really impacted me, and I think it can really impact our culture here at North Allegheny. So the book is written by John Gordon, and he writes business leadership books and all sorts of other things. But he actually heard this story at a conference, and somebody else was presenting, and he asked this man, Damon West, if he could collaborate and create a book based around it. So the premise is there was a student who was really struggling at school, just overwhelmed with football. He was like the quarterback of the football team, who overwhelmed with classes in high school and the homework assignments and the tests and the quizzes that were coming up. And he went to go talk to his teacher, and his teacher said, kind of brought up an object lesson. And so the object lesson goes like this. He asked the young man, and I'll abbreviate to make it shorter than a longer book. He asked the young man, have you ever, what happens to a carrot when you put it in a pot of boiling water? And the student was like, I don't know, I haven't cooked like that before. And he goes, well, that's your homework. I want you to go home, I want you to boil a pot of water, put a carrot in it, and tell me what happens. Just don't get burnt. So the kid does that. He comes back and he says, well, the state of the carrot, so it became soft. And the teacher, pressed him with some questions, and ultimately he said, oh, you're telling me that I am becoming soft and weakened by the fact that I'm overwhelmed with all these stresses. So the boiling water represents like the stresses of the circumstances, and the carrot represents me. And the teacher's like, bingo, you got it. So, but if it was just that, then the end of the story would be, oh, I'm overwhelmed, I'm weakened by my environment. So then the teacher went forward and said, have you ever put an egg in boiling water? And the kid was like, oh yeah, I've done that. The egg becomes hardened. And he goes, well, what do you think that means? And he said, well, there's some people in the world who, when faced with adverse circumstances, become soft like the carrot or weakened. And other people become hardened like the egg. Maybe they become more negative, a little more jaded, and they approach their circumstances from a negative perspective, or that changes them personally. So then the teacher comes back and says, well, what happens if you put a coffee bean into a pot of boiling water? And the student says, well, I don't know. So he does the same thing as the carrot. He says, take it home, put it in a pot of boiling water, don't get burnt, tell me what happens. So the student comes back and he goes, it made coffee. And he was so excited. And so the teacher pressed him with some questions, and ultimately the student came up with, instead of allowing the circumstances or the boiling water to impact you negatively, either by making you weakened and turning you, like the carrot, into a softened state, or hardened or jaded by turning you into the egg state, the hard-boiled egg state, the coffee bean, instead, when put into adverse circumstances, use that as an opportunity to transform its environment. So instead of allowing our circumstances to transform us, we actually have a choice. And that was the biggest lesson that I learned. I often become negative when faced with adverse circumstances or completely overwhelmed. So I waffle between the carrot and the egg, and I know a lot of people do too. And so that made me think a lot about greatness and people who are really good at what they do. Think about your elite sports athletes, or your amazing CEOs who actually worked their way up that ladder. And a lot of them are tendency fighters. They fight the tendency to just kind of be mediocre. They fight the tendency to be lazy. They fight the tendency to do what they want to do, instead progress themselves forward. So kind of mixing that story with that concept that came into my head, I realized that in order for us to be great at what we do, we have that choice to choose to transform our environment, to fight the tendency to want to allow the circumstances to impact us. That's our tendency, to waffle between the carrot and the egg. I'm convinced. So I know my personal mission this year is to be a tendency fighter and try to fight the tendency to allow my circumstances to make me into the carrot or make me into the egg in those different states, and instead to be the coffee bean and transform our environment. So whether you're a part of the custodial team, the facilities, bus driver, cafeteria crew, a paraprofessional, teacher, administrator, whatever, realize that we have the power to choose how we respond to our circumstances. And every day we're put into circumstances, positive, negative, whatever. And every day we have the choice of how we're going to respond to those. This is the beginning of the year. We have a fresh start, and it's awesome. And we have the opportunity to transform our environment so that way our students have the highest likelihood not only for success, but for joy and happiness and the love that's due to them. And our kids are worth it. So I invite you to challenge yourself to think about the coffee bean story and join me in trying to be a tendency fighter.